I never thought a hobby could cost me my peace of mind. But when the HOA president showed up at my door with a citation for workshop noise, I realized my quiet life in Vermont was about to get very complicated. My name is Steven Krueger, and I had moved to Meadowbrook Estates in Burlington, Vermont 3 years ago after retiring from a 20-year career as an aircraft mechanic. The house was perfect, a 3-bedroom colonial with a detached 2-car garage that I had converted into my woodworking shop. The neighborhood sat at the end of a private road that branched off from the main county highway, and my property happened to be the first one at the entrance. The previous owner had made some kind of informal arrangement with the HOA. I would later learn, but nobody bothered to tell me about it when I bought the place. I spent most of my weekends in that workshop, building furniture and restoring antiques. The smell of sawdust, the hum of the table saw, the satisfaction of sanding a piece of oak until it was smooth as glass, these things brought me joy. My workshop hours were reasonable, never before 9 in the morning, never after 6 in the evening, and never on Sundays. I thought I was being a considerate neighbor. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when Patricia Sanderson knocked on my door. She was the HOA president, a woman in her mid-50s with highlighted blonde hair styled in that typical suburban bob, wearing a purple cardigan despite the mild weather. She carried a clipboard and had that particular smile that people use when they are about to ruin your day but want to seem pleasant about it. "Mr. Krueger, do you have a moment?" she asked, not waiting for an answer before stepping onto my porch. "Sure, what can I do for you?" I wiped my hands on my jeans. I had been in the middle of staining a dresser. She clicked her pen and made a mark on her clipboard. "I am here on behalf of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. We have received multiple complaints about excessive noise coming from your property." I blinked. "Noise complaints? From who?" "That information is confidential," Patricia said, her smile never wavering. "But the complaints are quite serious. Residents have reported hearing power tools at unreasonable hours, disrupting the peaceful enjoyment of their homes." "I only work during the day, and I keep my garage door closed most of the time," I said, feeling my blood pressure rising. "What exactly are the unreasonable hours?" She consulted her clipboard. "According to our HOA covenants, any noise that can be heard from neighboring properties between the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. is prohibited. However, we also have a clause about excessive noise at any time that disturbs the community's tranquility." "I have never worked past 6 in the evening or before 9 in the morning," I said firmly. "And I am running a table saw and a router, not hosting rock concerts." Patricia's smile tightened. "Nevertheless, the board has voted to issue you a formal citation. This is your first warning. The fine is $250, and if the violations continue, subsequent fines will be $500 each." She handed me an official-looking document with the HOA letterhead. I stared at it, reading the formal language about noise ordinances and community standards. The citation was dated for 3 days ago. Apparently they had already held a hearing without bothering to invite me. "This is ridiculous," I said. "I am doing honest work in my own garage. The covenants are quite clear, Mr. Krueger. Every homeowner agreed to them when purchasing property in Meadowbrook Estates. Have a good day." Patricia turned and walked back to her white Lexus SUV parked in my driveway. I stood there holding the citation, anger simmering in my chest. $250 for running power tools during daylight hours in my own workshop. I went back inside and dug out the thick folder of paperwork from when I had bought the house. Sure enough, buried in the covenants was a vague clause about noise, but nothing that specifically prohibited what I was doing. Over the next week, I tried to be even more careful. I kept the garage door closed, I put up some sound insulation foam on the walls, and I even switched to hand tools for some of the finer work. It did not matter. The following Tuesday, Patricia was back with another citation. "Mr. Krueger, I am disappointed to see that the noise violations have continued," she said, standing on my porch with her clipboard and that infuriating smile. "I have barely used my power tools this week," I protested. "I have been doing most of my work with hand saws and chisels." "The complaints have persisted," Patricia said. "The board takes these matters very seriously. That is another $500. I snatched the paper from her hand. "Who exactly is complaining? I have a right to know my accuser." "HOA policy protects the privacy of residents who file complaints," she said. "But I can assure you, multiple households have expressed concerns." After she left, I walked around the neighborhood. My house was at the entrance of the private road, which was about a quarter-mile long and curved through a wooded area, before opening into the main development where 15 other houses sat on large lots. The nearest house to mine was at least 200 feet away and separated by a thick line of pine trees. I could not imagine how anyone was hearing my workshop from that distance, especially with all the precautions I was taking. That evening, my neighbor Tom Fletcher stopped by. He lived 2 houses down and was one of the few people in the development I actually talked to regularly. "Hey, Steven, I heard Patricia has been giving you grief," Tom said, leaning against his truck. "You heard about that?" I asked. "Everyone has heard about it." "Patricia has been on a rampage lately." He shook his head. "Between you and me, I think she is just looking for reasons to flex her authority. The HOA has been pretty quiet for the past year, and I guess she needs something to do." "I cannot afford to keep paying these fines," I said. "And I am not doing anything wrong." Tom nodded sympathetically. "Have you thought about fighting it? You could request a hearing with the full board." I had not thought about that. "Would it do any good?" "Probably not," Tom admitted. "Patricia basically controls the board. Her best friend Denise is the treasurer, and her yoga instructor Linda is the secretary. They all vote the same way she does." "Great. A classic case of HOA tyranny with no checks or balances." The next day, I decided to do some research. I pulled up the HOA meeting minutes from the past 2 years, which were technically public record for homeowners. What I found was interesting. The noise complaints against me had started exactly 1 week after I had declined to plow the private road during last winter's big snowstorm. Let me back up and explain. The private road that led into Meadowbrook Estates was technically owned by the HOA, but it was not maintained by the county. That meant snow removal was the HOA's responsibility. However, the HOA had apparently been relying on the previous owner of my property, a guy named Robert Chin, to plow the road with his truck and plow blade. Robert had a heavy-duty Ford F-350 with commercial plowing equipment, and according to some old email chains I found in the HOA archives, he had volunteered to plow the road in exchange for the HOA waiving his annual dues. When I bought the house, nobody mentioned this arrangement to me. I drove a regular Toyota Tacoma without any plow attachment, and I had no interest in becoming the neighborhood snow removal service. Last February, when we got hit with 18 inches of snow overnight, Patricia had called me at 6 in the morning demanding that I plow the road. I had politely explained that I did not have a plow and suggested she contact a professional snow removal service. She had not been happy about it. The HOA had to scramble to find a plow service, and by the time someone showed up, it was late afternoon. Several residents had missed work, and a few had been pretty vocal about their displeasure at the HOA meeting that month. I had not attended that meeting, which in retrospect was a mistake. Now, 8 months later, Patricia was apparently getting her revenge through noise citations. I decided to take Tom's advice and request a formal hearing. I sent an email to the HOA board stating that I disputed the citations and wanted to present my case. The hearing was scheduled for the following month, right before Thanksgiving. In the meantime, I kept working in my workshop but switched almost entirely to hand tools. It was slower and more physically demanding, but I was not going to let Patricia bully me into giving up my hobby. I was building a rocking chair for my daughter's new baby, my first grandchild, and I was determined to finish it. The hearing took place in the community clubhouse, a small building near the entrance of the development. When I arrived, Patricia, Denise, and Linda were already seated at a table at the front of the room. About 7 other residents were scattered in the folding chairs, apparently there to watch the proceedings. "Mr. Krueger, thank you for coming," Patricia said in her formal HOA president voice. "You have requested this hearing to dispute the noise citations issued against you. Please state your case." I stood up, feeling like I was on trial. "I work in my workshop during reasonable daytime hours, never before 9 a.m. or after 6 p.m., and never on Sundays. I have installed sound insulation and kept my garage door closed. I am not violating any reasonable interpretation of the HOA noise covenants." Patricia glanced at her notes. "We have documented complaints from multiple residents about power tool noise disturbing the peace of the community." "I would like to see those complaints," I said, "and I would like to know which residents filed them because I have a right to face my accusers." Linda, the secretary, spoke up. "HOA policy protects the anonymity of complainants." "That is convenient," I said, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "How do I know these complaints are even real?" Patricia's expression hardened. "Are you accusing this board of fabricating complaints?" "I am saying that I have taken every reasonable precaution, and I find it suspicious that these complaints started right after I declined to plow the private road last winter." A murmur went through the small audience. Patricia's face flushed slightly. "That is a completely separate matter," she said. "The previous owner had volunteered to provide snow removal services, and I never agreed to continue that arrangement," I said. "I bought a house, not a job as the HOA's unpaid snow plow driver." Denise, the treasurer, leaned forward. "The point is, Mr. Krueger, that you are creating excessive noise that disturbs the community. Multiple residents have complained. The board has voted to uphold the citations." "You voted before this hearing even started?" I asked. "We reviewed the evidence and made our decision," Patricia said. "This hearing is simply a formality to allow you to present your perspective. However, the citations stand. You now owe $750 in fines, due within 30 days. Additionally, if the noise violations continue, future fines will be $1,000 per incident." I looked around the room at the other residents. A couple of them looked uncomfortable, but nobody spoke up in my defense. Tom Fletcher was not there. He had mentioned he would be out of town for work. "This is absurd," I said. "You are abusing your authority." "This hearing is concluded," Patricia said. "If you fail to pay the fines within 30 days, the HOA will place a lien on your property." I walked out of that clubhouse furious. A lien on my property over some trumped-up noise complaints. This was extortion, plain and simple. That night, I lay awake thinking about the situation. I could pay the fines and hope Patricia eventually got bored with harassing me, but that felt like giving in to a bully. I could hire a lawyer and fight the HOA in court, but that would cost thousands of dollars with no guarantee of success. Or I could find another way to make my point, November arrived with typical Vermont weather, cold and gray with the promise of snow in the air. I had been watching the weather forecasts closely. A major winter storm was predicted for the second week of November, potentially the first significant snowfall of the season. The meteorologists were calling for 12 to 16 inches. I thought about the private road and the informal arrangement the HOA had enjoyed with the previous owner. They had taken that service for granted, and when I declined to continue it, Patricia had retaliated with bogus noise complaints. Well, two could play that game. The storm hit on a Wednesday night. I watched from my living room window as the snow began to fall, thick and heavy. By Thursday morning, there were already 10 inches on the ground, and it was still coming down. The county plows had cleared the main highway, but our private road was buried. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. It was Patricia. "Mr. Krueger, we need the road plowed immediately," she said without preamble. "Several residents need to get to work." "I am sorry, but I do not have a plow," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I explained this to you last winter. You need to make arrangements," Patricia insisted. "The road is impassable." "That sounds like an HOA responsibility," I said. "The road belongs to the HOA, not to me. I suggest you contact a professional snow removal service." "We do not have one under contract," Patricia said, her voice rising. "Robert always handled it." "Robert does not live here anymore," I said. "And I never agreed to take over his volunteer work, especially not after you have fined me $750 for working in my own garage." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Are you seriously going to let the entire neighborhood suffer because of your petty grudge?" "I am not letting anyone suffer," I said calmly. "I am simply declining to volunteer my time and equipment to plow a road that the HOA is responsible for maintaining. The same HOA that has been harassing me with bogus noise complaints for the past month." Patricia hung up on me. I made myself a cup of coffee and watched through the window as the snow continued to fall. Around 9 a.m., I saw Linda trying to drive out in her Honda Accord. She made it about 50 feet down the private road before getting stuck in the snow. Her husband came out with a shovel and tried to dig her out, but it was hopeless. The snow was too deep. By noon, the storm had dropped 14 inches, and it was finally starting to taper off. I could see several of my neighbors standing in their driveways, looking helplessly at the buried road. The main highway was clear. The county plows had been through multiple times, but the quarter-mile private road connecting Meadowbrook Estates to that highway was completely impassable. My phone rang again. This time it was Denise. "Steven, please, we need your help," she said, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. "My husband needs to get to the hospital. He has a dialysis appointment this afternoon that he cannot miss." I felt a twinge of guilt. I had not considered medical emergencies. "Call an ambulance," I said. "They can get through." "We cannot afford an ambulance ride just to get him to dialysis," Denise said. "Please, can you just plow the road? We will pay you." "I do not have a plow," I repeated. "I have told you this multiple times. You need to hire a professional service." "Patricia is trying to reach the services in the area, but everyone is booked because of the storm," Denise said. "Please, there must be something you can do." I thought about it. I could probably make it through the snow with my truck if I took it slow and steady. The Tacoma had 4-wheel drive and good winter tires, but that would mean bailing out the HOA, and I was not inclined to do that after everything Patricia had put me through. "I am sorry about your husband's situation," I said, and I meant it. "But this is exactly why the HOA should have had a professional snow removal service under contract. I am not responsible for the poor planning of the board." Denise hung up without saying goodbye. Around 2 p.m., I saw an ambulance make its way down the private road, moving slowly but steadily through the deep snow. I assumed they were there for Denise's husband. That made me feel slightly better. At least the medical emergency was handled. My phone kept ringing throughout the afternoon. Linda called, then several neighbors I barely knew, all begging or demanding that I plow the road. I gave them all the same answer. I did not have a plow, and this was the HOA's responsibility. Patricia called again around 4 p.m. "You are deliberately sabotaging this community," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "This is retaliation, pure and simple." "Retaliation for what?" I asked innocently. "I am just a homeowner who happens to live at the entrance of the development. I am not responsible for maintaining HOA property." "You know exactly what you are doing," Patricia hissed. "We need that road cleared." "Then hire someone to clear it," I said. "That is what HOAs do. They collect dues and use that money to maintain common areas." "How much does the HOA have in its budget?" There was a pause. "That is confidential board business. I am a homeowner. I have a right to see the financial statements." I had been reading up on Vermont HOA law. In fact, I think I will request a copy of the budget for the past 3 years. Patricia hung up on me again. That evening, I made myself dinner and settled in to watch some television. My driveway was clear. I had shoveled it that morning, and I had no need to go anywhere. The neighborhood was quiet except for the occasional sound of someone trying and failing to drive through the deep snow on the private road. Friday morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. The snow had stopped, but the private road was still a mess. I watched as Patricia attempted to drive out in her Lexus. She made it about 100 feet before sliding sideways into a snowbank. She got out, slammed the door, and marched back to her house. Around 10 a.m., a large truck with a plow blade finally appeared on the main highway. It turned onto our private road and began clearing the snow. I watched with satisfaction as the driver made several passes, pushing the snow to the sides and opening up the road. It took about 45 minutes to clear the quarter-mile stretch. After the plow truck left, I saw several of my neighbors emerge from their houses and drive out, finally able to get to work or run errands. Patricia's Lexus was still stuck in the snowbank. I considered going out to help push her free, but decided against it. She had made her position clear. That afternoon, I received an email from the HOA. It was another citation, this time for failure to maintain community standards and refusing to provide necessary services. The fine was $1,000. I read the email twice, then started laughing. They were actually trying to fine me for not plowing their road. The audacity was almost impressive. I forwarded the email to a lawyer friend of mine in Montpelier, a guy named Rick Harrison who specialized in property law. I had gone to high school with Rick, and we had stayed in touch over the years. I explained the whole situation, the noise complaints, the snow plowing, and now this latest absurd citation. Rick called me an hour later. "Steven, this is the most ridiculous HOA overreach I have seen in years," he said, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. "They cannot fine you for refusing to volunteer your labor. That is not how HOAs work." "Can you help me fight this?" I asked. "Absolutely," Rick said. "But I think we can do better than just fight it. I think we can take these people down a peg. Are you willing to go nuclear on this? What did you have in mind?" "Let me do some digging into their finances and governing documents," Rick said. "I have a feeling this Patricia person has been playing fast and loose with HOA rules. Give me a week." I agreed and hung up feeling better than I had in weeks. Maybe I was not going to be bullied after all. The following week was quiet. I ignored the latest citation and continued working in my workshop. I had finished the rocking chair for my daughter and started on a hope chest. I used power tools openly, running my table saw and router during the middle of the day with the garage door half open. If Patricia wanted to complain, she could go ahead. I was done trying to appease her. Rick called me back on a Tuesday evening. "Steven, you are not going to believe what I found," he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "Your HOA president has been embezzling." "What?" "Patricia Sanderson has been siphoning money from the HOA accounts for the past 2 years," Rick explained. "I got access to the financial records. You have a legal right to them as a homeowner, and there are all sorts of irregularities. Payments to vendors that do not exist, inflated costs for services, cash withdrawals that are not properly documented. I estimate she has stolen at least $30,000. I sat down heavily on my couch. "Are you sure?" "Positive," Rick said. "And here is the kicker. The reason the HOA did not have a snow removal service under contract is because Patricia had been pocketing the money that was budgeted for it. According to the budget from 3 years ago, there was a line item for $5,000 annually for snow removal. That money has been disappearing." "What do we do?" I asked. "We report it to the police," Rick said. "This is embezzlement and fraud, but first I think you should call an emergency HOA meeting. As a homeowner, you have the right to do that if you get signatures from at least 20% of the residents." "How many houses are in the development?" 16 total, including mine," I said. "So you need signatures from 3 homeowners besides yourself," Rick said. "Think you can get them?" "I think so," I said. Tom Fletcher would definitely sign, and I knew a few other neighbors who were not fans of Patricia's authoritarian style. Over the next few days, I quietly talked to my neighbors. Tom signed immediately. So did a young couple, Mark and Jennifer Torres, who lived at the far end of the development. They had gotten into a dispute with Patricia over the color they wanted to paint their house, and they were still bitter about it. The 4th signature came from an older gentleman named Walter Price, who had lived in Meadowbrook Estates since it was first built. Walter did not like the way Patricia had been running things and was happy to support anything that might lead to new leadership. With the 4 signatures, I submitted a formal request for an emergency HOA meeting to discuss financial irregularities and governance concerns. According to the bylaws, the board had to schedule the meeting within 2 weeks. Patricia called me the day after I submitted the request. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded. "Exercising my rights as a homeowner," I said calmly. "I have concerns about how the HOA is being run, and I am bringing those concerns to the membership." "This is because of the noise citations, is it not?" Patricia said. "You are just trying to get revenge." "This is about transparency and proper governance," I said. "The members deserve to know how their dues are being spent." "You are going to regret this," Patricia said, and hung up. The emergency meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday in December, held in the community clubhouse at 7 p.m. When I arrived with Rick, the room was packed. All 15 of the other homeowners were there, many of them looking curious or concerned. Patricia, Denise, and Linda sat at the front table, looking defensive. Patricia called the meeting to order. This emergency meeting was requested by Steven Krueger to discuss alleged concerns about HOA governance. "Mr. Krueger, you have the floor." I stood up, and Rick stood with me. "Thank you, Patricia. I have asked my attorney, Rick Harrison, to present some findings about the HOA's financial management." Patricia's face went pale. "Your attorney? This is highly irregular." "What is irregular is the financial mismanagement this board has been engaged in," Rick said smoothly. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I have copies of the HOA financial statements for the past 3 years, which Mr. Krueger legally requested and received. I also have documentation of numerous irregularities. He began distributing copies to the assembled homeowners. As you can see on page 4, there is a budgeted line item for snow removal services in the amount of $5,000 per year. However, no snow removal service has been under contract for the past 2 years. Where did that money go? Patricia stood up. That money was reallocated to other necessary expenses. Reallocated without a membership vote? Rick asked. According to the bylaws, any budget reallocation over $1,000 requires a vote of the membership. Can you provide documentation of such a vote? Patricia sat down without answering. Rick continued. There are also payments listed to vendors that I cannot verify actually exist. For example, there is a company called Burlington Property Maintenance that received monthly payments of $800 for landscaping services. I have contacted every landscaping company in the Burlington area, and nobody has heard of Burlington Property Maintenance. The business is not registered with the Vermont Secretary of State. Murmurs of concern rippled through the room. Tom Fletcher raised his hand. Are you saying Patricia made up a fake company? I am saying that the payments cannot be verified, Rick said carefully. There are similar issues with other vendors listed in the financial records. In total, I have identified approximately $30,000 in questionable or undocumented expenses over the past 2 years. Denise stood up, her face red. This is outrageous. Are you accusing Patricia of stealing? I am presenting facts, Rick said. The HOA members can draw their own conclusions. Walter Price spoke up from the back of the room. I think we need to call the police. If money has been stolen, that is a crime. Patricia stood up again, looking panicked. Now wait just a minute. There are explanations for all of these expenses. The records might not be perfectly organized, but that does not mean anything improper happened. Then you will have no problem explaining everything to the police, I said. Patricia grabbed her purse. I do not have to sit here and be accused of things. This meeting is adjourned. You do not have the authority to adjourn a meeting called by the membership, Rick said. According to the bylaws, Patricia Sanderson, as HOA president, you are required to remain and answer questions from the homeowners. Patricia looked around the room, seeing the hostile faces of her neighbors. She sat back down slowly. Tom Fletcher stood up. I move that we vote to remove Patricia Sanderson, Denise Morton, and Linda Hayes from the HOA board, effective immediately, for mismanagement of HOA funds and failure to fulfill their fiduciary duties. I second that motion, Walter Price said. The vote was 15-1, with only Denise voting against. Patricia, Denise, and Linda were officially removed from the board. Next, Walter moved to appoint a temporary board consisting of himself, Tom Fletcher, and Jennifer Torres to serve until a proper election could be held. The motion passed unanimously. After the vote, Rick addressed the room again. I strongly recommend that the new board file a police report regarding the financial irregularities. The evidence I have compiled should be turned over to law enforcement for investigation. Walter nodded. I will contact the Burlington Police Department tomorrow morning. Patricia stood up, tears streaming down her face. You people have no idea what you have done. I have given 2 years of my life to this community. And helped yourself to $30,000 of our money in the process, Tom said coldly. Patricia, Denise, and Linda left the meeting without another word. The following morning, Walter called me to say he had filed a report with the Burlington police. A detective named Sarah Chen contacted me that afternoon to get my statement and copies of the financial documents Rick had compiled. She said the department would be opening an investigation into potential embezzlement. Over the next few weeks, the police investigation moved forward. Detective Chen interviewed all the board members and contacted the supposed vendors listed in the HOA records. As Rick had discovered, many of them did not exist. The ones that did exist had no record of providing services to Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. The police also subpoenaed Patricia's bank records. What they found was damning. Deposits that corresponded exactly to the amounts of the questionable HOA checks, made within days of those checks being written. Patricia had not even been clever about hiding it. She had been depositing HOA money directly into her personal checking account. In mid-December, Detective Chen called to tell me that Patricia Sanderson had been arrested and charged with embezzlement and fraud. The prosecutor was seeking charges for theft over $25,000, which in Vermont carried a potential sentence of up to 10 years in prison and a fine of up to $100,000. The news spread through the neighborhood quickly. Denise and Linda both denied knowing anything about the embezzlement. Linda claimed she had just signed whatever Patricia put in front of her, and Denise insisted that, as treasurer, she had trusted Patricia to handle the actual financial transactions. The police investigation found no evidence that either of them had personally benefited from the scheme, so they were not charged. The temporary board, led by Walter, immediately hired a legitimate snow removal service and put them under contract for the rest of the winter. They also commissioned a full audit of the HOA finances to determine the exact amount that had been stolen and to identify any other irregularities. As for me, the new board immediately dropped all the bogus fines Patricia had levied against me. Walter personally apologized for not speaking up sooner during the old board's harassment. "I should have said something at that hearing," Walter told me one afternoon in early January. "I knew something was not right, but I did not want to rock the boat. I am sorry you had to deal with all that." "Water under the bridge," I said. "I am just glad the truth came out." "That business with the snow plowing, that was brilliant," Walter said with a chuckle. "Patricia was absolutely furious." "I was not trying to be vindictive," I said. "I just was not going to volunteer my time after the way she treated me." "Well, it worked out," Walter said. "If you had not stood up to her, we never would have looked into the finances. She probably would have kept stealing for years." The new board also clarified the noise policies in the HOA covenants. They established specific decibel limits and specific prohibited hours: 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. on weekdays and 8 p.m. to 10 a.m. on weekends. Normal daytime activities, including hobby work in garages and workshops, were explicitly permitted as long as they stayed under the decibel limits. I measured the noise from my workshop at the property line, and it was well under the threshold. In February, Vermont got hit with another big snowstorm, this one dumping nearly 2 feet of snow overnight. I woke up that morning and looked out my window to see the private road being plowed by a professional service with a huge truck and efficient crew. They had the road clear by 9 a.m., and I was able to drive out to get coffee and breakfast without any trouble. It felt good to be part of a functional community again. Patricia's criminal case moved through the legal system over the following months. In March, she pleaded guilty to embezzlement in exchange for the fraud charges being dropped. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, with all but 6 months suspended, meaning she would serve 6 months and then be on probation for the remainder. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $31,400, the total amount the audit had determined she had stolen. Denise and Linda both moved out of Meadowbrook Estates before the end of the year. Neither of them were charged with crimes, but the stigma of having been associated with Patricia's scheme made staying in the neighborhood uncomfortable. Their houses sold quickly. Burlington is a desirable market, and new families moved in. The new permanent board was elected in April. Tom Fletcher became president, Jennifer Torres became treasurer, and Walter Price stayed on as secretary. They ran the HOA in a much more transparent and democratic way, with regular meetings, open finances, and actual input from the membership. As for me, I continued working in my workshop without any further harassment. I finished the Hope chest and started on a dining table set. My daughter had her baby in March, a healthy little girl named Emma, and the rocking chair I had built was a huge hit. My daughter sent me a photo of her rocking Emma to sleep in it, and that made all the stress of the past year worth it. One Saturday afternoon in May, Tom stopped by while I was working in the garage. I had the door open, enjoying the spring weather while sanding down some table legs. "Sounds good," Tom said, gesturing to the workshop. "What are you working on?" "Dining table," I said, holding up one of the legs. "Cherry wood. It is going to be beautiful when it is done." "I do not suppose you take commissions?" Tom asked. "My wife has been wanting a new coffee table." "I might be able to work something out," I said. "What did she have in mind?" We talked about designs and dimensions for a while. It felt nice to discuss woodworking with someone who appreciated the craft, rather than treating it like a nuisance. As Tom was leaving, he paused at the end of the driveway. "You know, I have been thinking about that whole mess with Patricia. If you had not stood your ground, none of us would have known what she was doing. You did this neighborhood a real service." "I was just defending myself," I said. "But I am glad it worked out for everyone." "Well, thanks," Tom said. "And I am serious about that coffee table. Let me know what you would charge." After he left, I went back to my sanding. The table was coming together nicely, the grain of the cherry wood creating beautiful natural patterns. I ran my hand over the smooth surface, feeling the satisfaction of work well done. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter. It was another photo of Emma, this time sleeping peacefully in the rocking chair. "She loves it. You are the best dad and grandpa ever." I smiled and set the phone down. Life was good. I had my workshop, my projects, and a community that finally functioned the way it was supposed to. The whole experience with Patricia and the HOA had been stressful and frustrating, but it had also taught me something important. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when it is uncomfortable or risky. Sometimes refusing to back down is the right thing to do. I fired up my table saw and went back to work, the familiar sound filling the garage. Nobody was going to complain about it. And if they did, we now had a fair and reasonable process to address it. That was all anyone could ask for. The rest of that summer passed peacefully. I finished the dining table and started on Tom's coffee table. I also took on a few other small commission projects from neighbors who admired my work. It turned out there was a real demand for custom furniture in Burlington, and I was enjoying the combination of hobby and small side business. In July, I attended the quarterly HOA meeting. The new board presented a balanced budget, complete with proper documentation and receipts for all expenses. They had even managed to rebuild the reserve fund that Patricia had depleted. The snow removal service was already contracted for the following winter, and they had gotten competitive bids from 3 different companies before making their choice. During the meeting, Jennifer Torres presented a proposal to create a community workshop space in the clubhouse basement. "Several residents have expressed interest in woodworking, metalworking, and other crafts," she explained. "We have the space, and if we pool resources, we could set up a shared workshop that everyone could use." The proposal passed unanimously. I volunteered to help set up the workshop and teach basic woodworking skills to interested neighbors. It felt like the community was finally coming together in a positive way. In August, I got a call from Detective Chen. "Mr. Krueger, I wanted to let you know that Patricia Sanderson began serving her sentence yesterday. She will be at the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility for the next 6 months. Thank you for letting me know," I said. "I also wanted to thank you for bringing this case to our attention," Detective Chen said. "Financial crimes in HOAs are more common than people realize, and they often go unreported because people do not want to cause trouble in their neighborhoods. You did the right thing." After we hung up, I thought about Patricia. I did not feel triumphant about her going to jail. If anything, I felt sad that she had thrown away her life over what amounted to greed and poor judgment. $30,000 over 2 years. It was not even that much money in the grand scheme of things. Certainly not worth going to prison over, but she had made her choices, and those choices had consequences. She had abused her authority, harassed innocent people, and stolen from her neighbors. Justice had been served. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a beer, watching the sun set over the Vermont hills. The neighborhood was quiet except for the sound of kids playing in someone's backyard and the distant hum of a lawnmower. It was the kind of peaceful suburban evening that I had imagined when I first moved to Meadowbrook Estates. My phone rang. It was Rick Harrison. "Hey, Steven, I have some news you might be interested in," he said. "Remember how Patricia was ordered to pay restitution? Well, her house just went on the market. She's going to have to sell it to cover the restitution payments and her legal fees." "That is going to be hard for her family," I said. "Patricia had a husband and 2 teenage kids. They are getting divorced," Rick said. "Her husband filed papers last month. Apparently, he did not know anything about the embezzlement and he is not taking it well." I felt a pang of sympathy for Patricia's kids. They had not done anything wrong, but they were paying the price for their mother's crimes. Their family was falling apart, their mother was in jail, and they were going to have to move out of the only home they had known. "That is rough," I said. "Play stupid games, win stupid prizes," Rick said. "She made her bed, now she has to lie in it." We talked for a few more minutes about other things, then said goodbye. I sat there on the porch for a while longer, thinking about how quickly things can fall apart. A year ago, Patricia had been the powerful HOA president, respected in the community and seemingly on top of the world. Now she was in jail, divorced and financially ruined, all because she could not resist skimming money from the HOA accounts. And all because she had decided to retaliate against me with bogus noise complaints, instead of just accepting that I was not going to be her unpaid snow plow service. If she had just left me alone, I never would have dug into the HOA finances. She would probably still be president, still stealing money, still running the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. But she pushed too hard, and it backfired spectacularly. September arrived with crisp autumn air and leaves starting to change color. I had settled into a comfortable routine, spending my mornings working on commission projects in the workshop and my afternoons doing other things, hiking, visiting my daughter and granddaughter, or just relaxing. One afternoon, I was in the workshop putting the finishing touches on a bookshelf when I heard a knock on the garage door frame. I looked up to see a woman I did not recognize, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair and a friendly smile. "Hi, are you Steven Krueger?" she asked. "That is me," I said, setting down my sandpaper. "I am Amanda Chen," she said. "I just moved into the house at the end of the road, the one that was owned by Denise Morton. My husband and I bought it last month." "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "Any relation to Detective Sarah Chen?" Amanda laughed. "No, just a coincidence, but I heard all about what happened with the previous HOA board. Quite a story." It was an interesting few months, I admitted. I also heard that you do custom woodworking, Amanda said. We are looking for someone to build some custom cabinets for our kitchen. Would you be interested in taking on a project like that? We spent the next hour discussing her vision for the kitchen, taking measurements and talking about wood types and finishes. It was exactly the kind of project I enjoyed, challenging enough to be interesting but not so complex that it would take over my life. As Amanda was leaving, she paused. You know, my husband and I were a little nervous about moving into an HOA community after we heard about all the drama. But everyone we have met so far has been really nice. It seems like a good neighborhood. It is, I said. We just had to clear out some bad leadership. The new board is doing a great job. After she left, I thought about how much had changed since that first day when Patricia showed up with her clipboard and her fake smile. The neighborhood had been through a crisis, but it had come out stronger on the other side. We had a functional HOA now, one that actually served the interests of the homeowners, instead of being a tool for one person's ego and greed. October brought the first frost, and the first real cold snap of the season. I spent a weekend winterizing my house and making sure my truck was ready for the coming snow. I also installed a remote starter, a little luxury I had been putting off but finally decided to treat myself to. The community workshop in the clubhouse basement was finished, and we held a grand opening in late October. About half the neighborhood showed up, and I gave a demonstration on basic woodworking safety and techniques. 3 people signed up for the beginner woodworking class I was going to teach starting in November. At the grand opening, Walter pulled me aside. I have been meaning to tell you something, he said. The HOA received Patricia's first restitution payment last week, $500. She is on a payment plan to pay back everything she stole. That is good, I said. I am glad she is taking responsibility. The board voted to use the restitution money to fund community improvements, Walter said. We are thinking about putting in a new playground for the kids and maybe repaving the private road. It needs it. Sounds like good uses, I said. Walter nodded. We also want to create a small fund to help any homeowner who needs emergency assistance, like if someone has a medical situation and needs help with their HOA dues for a month or two. We do not want anyone to feel like they cannot ask for help if they need it. That seemed like a fitting legacy for the whole mess. Taking money that had been stolen through greed and using it to help people in need. November arrived, and with it came the first significant snowfall of the season. 7 inches overnight, enough to make the roads treacherous, but not quite the monster storm we had gotten the previous year. I woke up and looked out the window to see the private road already being plowed by the contracted service. They were efficient and thorough, and by the time I was ready to leave for breakfast, the road was completely clear. I drove past the house that had belonged to Patricia. It was still on the market, the for sale sign standing in the front yard with a light dusting of snow on top. I wondered where Patricia's family had ended up, whether the kids had been able to stay in their schools or if they had been forced to move to a different district. Later that day, Tom called me. Hey Steven, I just got off the phone with a reporter from the Burlington Free Press. They are doing a story about HOA embezzlement and they want to interview someone from Meadowbrook Estates. I gave them your number, hope that is okay. Sure, I said. I had nothing to hide. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Torres, called me that evening. We talked for about 30 minutes about the whole situation, how the noise complaints had led me to investigate the HOA finances, and how we had discovered Patricia's embezzlement. Jessica was particularly interested in the snow plowing angle. So you essentially used your leverage as the person at the entrance of the development to force accountability, she asked. I would not put it that way, I said. I simply declined to volunteer my time and equipment for something that was the HOA's responsibility. The fact that it led to a deeper examination of how the HOA was being run was just a consequence. But you must have known that refusing to plow would cause problems, Jessica pressed. I knew it would be inconvenient, I admitted. But I was not responsible for the fact that the HOA had not contracted a professional service. That was a failure of leadership, which turned out to be part of a larger pattern of mismanagement and theft. The article came out a week later, on the front page of the local news section. The headline read, Meadowbrook Estates homeowner uncovers HOA president's embezzlement scheme. It was a fair and accurate account of what had happened, and it included comments from Walter and Detective Chen as well. The article generated some interest. I got calls from a couple of other HOA residents in the Burlington area who had concerns about their own boards. I referred them all to Rick Harrison. If there were other corrupt HOA leaders out there, they deserved to be caught. December brought more snow and the holiday season. I spent Christmas with my daughter, her husband, and little Emma. The rocking chair I had built was still getting daily use, and seeing my granddaughter happy and healthy made everything else seem small in comparison. On New Year's Eve, the neighborhood held a party at the clubhouse. It was a potluck affair, with everyone bringing food and drinks. I brought a homemade apple pie and a case of local Vermont beer. The turnout was impressive. Nearly every household was represented. At midnight, as we counted down and toasted the new year, I looked around at my neighbors. Tom and his wife, Walter and his longtime partner, Jennifer Torres and her husband Mark, Amanda Chen and her family, and a dozen other good people who just wanted to live peacefully in their homes without drama or corruption. We had been through a difficult time, but we had come out of it stronger and more united. The HOA was now truly serving its purpose, maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and providing a framework for neighborly cooperation. It was what an HOA was supposed to be. Patricia Sanderson was scheduled to be released from jail in February, but she would not be returning to Meadowbrook Estates. Her house had finally sold in December, and according to Walter, the proceeds had gone to paying off her restitution debt and her legal fees. She would be starting over from scratch, probably in a different town or even a different state. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall. If anything, I wished it had never happened. I wished she had just been a fair and honest HOA president. I wished she had not stolen from her neighbors. I wished she had not decided to retaliate against me with bogus noise complaints. But wishing did not change reality. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. I had stood up for myself when I was being bullied. I had refused to be intimidated. And in doing so, I had accidentally uncovered a crime and helped my community. As the party wound down and people started heading home, Tom came over to me. Hey, I just wanted to say thanks again for everything you did this year. This neighborhood is a better place because you did not back down. I was just defending my right to work in my own garage, I said. You were doing more than that, Tom said. You were standing up to a tyrant, and the rest of us should have stood with you sooner. We shook hands, and I headed home through the cold winter night. The private road was clear, the street lights were working, and my workshop was waiting for me. I had projects to finish, furniture to build, and a granddaughter who would eventually need a toy chest and maybe a little table and chairs set. Life was good. The HOA drama was behind us. And I could run my table saw whenever I wanted, as long as I kept it reasonable. That was all I had ever asked for. The next morning, the first day of the new year, I went out to my workshop and fired up the heater. I had Amanda Chen's kitchen cabinets to work on, and I was eager to get started. The wood I had ordered, beautiful maple with a gorgeous grain pattern, had been delivered just before Christmas. As I measured and marked the wood for cutting, I thought about the past year. It had started with Patricia's harassment and those ridiculous noise complaints. It had escalated with the snow plowing standoff. And it had ended with justice being served and a community coming together. If someone had told me a year ago that I would end up being the person who uncovered an embezzlement scheme and helped reform a corrupt HOA board, I would have laughed. I was just a retired aircraft mechanic who liked to build furniture. I was not a crusader or an activist. I just wanted to be left alone to pursue my hobby. But sometimes life forces you into situations where you have to choose between backing down and standing up. And I had chosen to stand up. Not because I wanted to be a hero, but because I refused to be bullied. The table saw hum to life, and I carefully fed the maple through, making the first cut. The wood smelled fresh and clean, and the cut was perfect. This was going to be a beautiful set of cabinets. Outside, I could hear the neighborhood coming to life. Kids playing in the snow, someone starting their car, the distant sound of a snow blower clearing a driveway. Normal suburban sounds from a normal suburban neighborhood. That was all I had ever wanted. Normalcy. Peace. The freedom to work in my workshop without harassment. And now, finally, I had it. I spent the rest of that day working on the cabinets, losing myself in the familiar rhythms of measuring, cutting, and assembling. By the time the sun started to set, I had made good progress. The cabinet frames were taking shape, and I could already envision how they would look in Amanda's kitchen. As I cleaned up my workspace and prepared to head inside for dinner, I took a moment to appreciate what I had. A good home. A supportive community, a hobby that brought me joy. And the satisfaction of knowing that I had done the right thing, even when it had been difficult. Patricia Sanderson had tried to bully me into submission, and instead, she had ended up destroying her own life. There was a lesson in that, though I was not sure what it was. Maybe it was that karma is real. Or maybe it was that you should not start fights you cannot win. Or maybe it was just that crime does not pay. Whatever the lesson was, I was glad the whole ordeal was over. I was glad my neighborhood had a functional HOA again. And I was glad that I could work in my workshop in peace. As I locked up the garage and headed into the house, I smiled. It had been a long, strange journey from that first noise complaint to Patricia going to jail. But we had come through it, and we were better for it. Tomorrow I would be back in the workshop, making more progress on Amanda's cabinets. And the day after that, I would keep working. And the day after that, and the day after that. Building things with my hands, creating beauty from raw wood, and enjoying the simple satisfaction of work well done. That was enough for me. That was all I needed. My workshop, my tools, and the freedom to use them without some petty tyrant telling me I could not. Life was good. And it was about to get even better, because spring would come eventually, and with it, more projects, more challenges, and more opportunities to create. I was looking forward to all of it. As I settled into my recliner that evening with a good book and a cup of coffee, I felt genuinely content. The HOA saga was over. Justice had been served, and I could finally just be a regular homeowner again, living my life without drama or stress. That was the real victory. Not Patricia going to jail, not the board being reformed, but simply being able to live in peace. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well and refusing to let the bastards grind you down. I had learned that lesson the hard way, but I had learned it, and I would never forget it.